Hey guys, in this video we're going to be going over an absolutely wild Scrabble game that took place at a recent tournament held in Lake George, New York. This game was played between two of my good friends, Jackson Smiley and Eric Goldstein. Jackson's one of the top players in North America, and Eric is a very strong expert himself, so it's sure to be an exciting battle. And as you guys will see, what an exciting battle it was. Jackson is first in this game, and he's got a nice rack. He has the blank and some promising bingo tiles. There is no bingo available on this rack, so he plays Edo for 12 points, ridding himself of his Ds and one of his duplicate Es, hoping to draw a bingo next turn. Eric responds with Yuck, and Jackson, of course, still has the blank, but he's drawn 5 vowels, so he doesn't have any available bingos here. He finds a nice play of OI for 10 points, which sets up his L to make oil, and hopefully he can draw a bingo here on the bottom triple on his next turn. Eric realizes what Jackson is doing and blocks that spot using an L of his own, forming the word slant, and Jackson would draw a bingo playing Baileys and slants, making his blank an S for 76 points. As he points out, he had a couple better options here on the E column, hooking the Y on OK to make Yak. He could have played Beadly or Beamily over there for a few more points than Baileys, but he didn't see those plays during the game. Of course, Baileys is still a very solid play, scoring 76 points and taking a nice lead. Eric would strike back with Unsealed for 61 points, taking a 1-point lead. But as we'll see, that 1-point lead would be extremely short-lived, as Jackson pounces right back with Runegate for a whopping 149 points through the U in Unsealed. And the reason this is so many points is because Jackson has covered 2 triple word scores with one play. The R is on a triple word score, and the E is also on a triple word score. So Jackson gets 9 times the letter value for this play. And the tiles in Runegate add up to 11 after the G, which is on a double letter, is doubled. So you do 11 times 9 for 99, plus the 50-point bonus for bingoing. That's 149 points for one play. And Jackson now is in firm command of this game. He's up 148 points. And as we see here, Eric doesn't have a great rack, but he does find a nice play of Ovoid for 30 points, ridding himself of a V and multiple bad vowels. Jackson would respond with Writhe over here for 32 points, burning through some tiles, keeping the X for scoring, and closing down some bingo lines. Eric still has some difficult tiles. He plays Forb for 18. Jackson would play Wax for 44, further building his lead. Eric plays Gem for 29, and here Jackson gets a little bit greedy. He plays Hoolies for 37 points, which is not a word. Hoolie, spelled H-O-O-L-I-E, it can also be spelled H-O-O-L-Y, is an adjective. However, it's only an adjective, it's not a noun, so it can't be pluralized. Hoolies is not a word. And this does stay on the board. Eric doesn't challenge this off, and let's take note of the score here, guys. It's currently 360 to 176 in Jackson's favor. Jackson has more than double the number of points that Eric has. He's up by 184 points in this position. So you'd think that this game is basically already over, and that Jackson's going to go ahead and win this game quite comfortably. However, that could not be further from the case. As you can see here, Eric has a very nice rack, and he plays the bingo of Misdone, making the blank an I next to the O and Ovoid for 76 points. As Jackson notes, the phony play of Hoolies does actually take a front D. Doolies is a valid word, and Eric could have played a few 7s over here, such as Rodsmen, which would have scored a few more points than Misdone, but Misdone is actually a very smart play by Eric, because even after his bingo, Eric is still at a massive deficit. We see that Jackson's still up over 100 points after Eric's bingo, so Eric needs to introduce as much volatility into the game as he can, and Misdone accomplishes exactly that by putting an M in the middle of this triple-triple line that Jackson's going to have to deal with. So, smart play by Eric there, sacrificing a few points, and let's see how Jackson handles it. Now, of course, from Jackson's perspective, he is up a large number of points. He's up over 100 points. So really, all he needs to do here is block this M, play something through this M and Misdone that Eric has just opened, and he'll still be up a ton of points and should be in comfortable position for the rest of the game. So that's exactly what Jackson does, playing the word Jurum to this M for 42 points. A very nice play, it seems. Gets rid of his J, also 2 of his U's, and scores well and blocks the M. However, there is a massive problem with this play. And that problem is, Jurum is not a word. And not only is it not a word, it gets challenged off by Eric, so Jackson loses his turn, and then Eric slaps down Casimir for 158 points through this M, all of a sudden taking a 50-point lead himself. So just like Jackson had done earlier, Eric covers 2 triple word scores with one play. His C and his E are both on triple word scores, so he gets 12 times 9 plus 50. That's 158 points for a single play. And all of a sudden, the score is 410 to 360 in favor of Eric. So let's remind ourselves, guys, where we were just a couple of turns ago. After Jackson got away with this phony of Hoolies, the score was 360 to 176 in favor of Jackson. 2 turns later, Jackson still has 360, but instead of 176, Eric has 410 points. So that is a 234-point swing in 2 turns. Absolutely wild stuff. And let's just go back to Jackson's play of Durham over here. There were plenty of other available options for Jackson, the best of which would have been to play Jorum, J-O-R-U-M, which is a valid word, and presumably what Jackson got confused with when he played Durham. This would be a great play in this circumstance. It scores 42 points, gets rid of the J in one of his U's. Of course, the U and the V, keeping them together is not great, but he's going up 150 points, he's blocking the M. Jackson is absolutely in firm command of the game at this point. Even if Jackson doesn't see Jorum, there's several other options that he could have played. He could have gone with Muon, M-U-O-N, from this M. Of course, it's quite a lot worse than Jorum, since it scores only 18 instead of 42, and it keeps the J on the rack, which is a little bit clunky. But once again, it accomplishes really Jackson's #1 goal in this position, which is blocking that M, which Eric, as it turns out, did have a triple-triple through. Even if he doesn't use the triple, Jackson could play something like Vum over here for 8 points, or maybe Ovum for 9 points. He has many, many plays that would block the M, which once again is really the most important thing he needs to do in this position. But with all those plays available, Jackson somehow manages to phony with Durham, and then that comes off the board and Eric plays Casimir. So, like I said, we go from Jackson being up 184 points to Jackson being down 50 points in the span of just 2 turns. Absolutely insane. And now, of course, Jackson, having just lost his turn, is still stuck with the same garbage he has before. He still has a J to use and a V, and now he's sitting at a 50-point deficit. So, one of the wildest swings you'll ever see. But this game is still not over. Jackson plays Journo to this Owen Misdone, scoring 26 points and getting rid of as much of his garbage as he can. And as Jackson notes here, Quackle, the computer program that top players typically use to analyze their plays, had said Jackson was 99.8% to win after Misdone. If Jackson had just played Jorum instead of Durham, then Jackson would have been 99.8% to win in that position. Instead, after phonying and Eric triple-tripling, Jackson has gone down to 8.8%. Within just a single turn, Jackson goes from 99.8% to win, so that's only 0.2% to lose. In theory, Jackson's only losing 1 in 500 games, so now he's only 8.8% to win. He's not even 10% to win. He goes from 1 in 500 to lose to over 9 in 10 to lose in the span of 1 turn. That's just absolutely ridiculous. But like I said, the game goes on here. Eric responds with Grist for 16 points, and Jackson has drawn the Q, and he's got a pretty interesting decision on his hands here. He ends up going with Qua for 29 points, getting rid of his Q in the top left here. There were a few other options that he considered, as he mentions here in his comment, that would have been interesting. He could have played something like Nan or Nav from this N and Misdone, trying to set up a big Q play on the right. So, for instance, if he played Nav, then what he'd be doing is hoping to draw one of the E's and then setting up a big play such as Queen, Q-U-E-A-N, with Knave over here. The problem with Nav is there's several E's unseen, so Eric is pretty likely to have one of those E's and be able to play there and block that spot. So Jackson decided that Nav probably wasn't viable. Another option he looked at was Nan in the same spot, which is kind of interesting. Just N-A-N here for 5 points, with the idea being that Nan takes an A to make Nana, and Jackson would have the last A, and he could potentially land a big Q spot, or Q play over here. And the nice thing about Nan, as opposed to Nav, is that there are no A's unseen or any other tiles that hook Nan, so it might be difficult for Eric to really do anything there. That being said, as Jackson noted, keeping the Q and the V together is pretty clunky, and it shouldn't be too hard for Eric to just play a 2-letter word or something above the N and block. Of course, it'll be pretty obvious to Eric what Jackson's doing with a play that scores so few points as Nan does, and Eric is going to sniff that out and be able to block one way or another most likely, and this play probably isn't going to work. So instead of that, Jackson probably smartly decides to go with Qua, scoring more points now and getting rid of his Q while it's still easy for him to do so. Now, in this position here, Eric is still in pretty good shape. He's up 11 points, but he does have a pretty clunky rack. He's got an F, 2 Ps, and a Z. And it's an extremely complicated position. It's a 1 in the bag pre-endgame, so in theory, Eric would need to think about all 8 of the different tiles that he could draw from the bag. Really 7 different tiles, because there are 2 Es. But that's still a lot of different possibilities for Eric to iterate through, and they're all fairly complicated endgames. I won't go through all the details in this video, but Eric makes the play of Zep, which is not a bad play. It turns out it's not his best play. His best play would have actually been to play Fez over there in the same spot, which looks a little bit counterintuitive because it scores fewer points than Zep. Zep scores 24, Fez only scores 19. Also, Fez keeps duplicate P's, and normally you don't want to keep duplicate tiles if you can help it. But the main reason Fez would have been a little bit better was actually two things. One, the F and the P is a pretty clunky combination. Keeping the two P's together isn't ideal, but two P's actually aren't too bad together. There are a number of words that have two P's consecutively, whereas FP is a pretty difficult combo, and it could give Eric some trouble in the endgame. Number two is putting the Z over here next to this E makes it harder for Jackson to overlap with this Y. And there's some potential for Jackson to make plays like Yenta or Yints, which could be useful for him in this endgame, as we'll see in the actual game. And playing Fez would have prevented that, because the only tile that can go after a Z is an A, and Jackson wouldn't have any 5s that start YA. However, after Zep, Jackson could put either an A, an E, or an I, because PA, PE, and PI are all valid, and he could play something like Yenta or Yints, which, as we'll see, do prove very useful for him in the endgame. So, in any case, Eric plays Zep here, and Jackson here is down 35 points, and it looks like a pretty tall order for him, given Eric still has some scoring tiles, and how is Jackson going to make up 35 points in this endgame? Well, it comes down to that spot I just mentioned when I was talking about Eric's play with the Y and Bally's. Jackson plays Vi over here for 25 points, and as he mentions, he got a really, really fortunate pull there, pulling EEI out of the bag after his play of Claw, something he really needed to do if he wanted any chances. And here, Eric is still up 10 points, but the problem is Jackson has AENT, and he's going to be playing out next turn. He's threatening Yenta, Y-E-N-T-A, from this Y in Bally's. And it's extremely difficult for Eric to block that. He only has one vowel, he only has an E, and if Eric wants to block that, he'd probably have to just play something like YE over here, or maybe, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, because if he plays Yep, then Jackson can just go out with Anti under the P for even more points hitting the triple. So that's not going to really work. Eric would have to just play YE. He could also play YER in that spot, but then Jackson could play Etna, making RE and go out there as well. So if Eric just plays YE, the problem is Jackson can still go out on the top right. There's this E in Casimir, and Jackson can go out with Eaton, E-A-T-E-N, for 6 points. And 6, of course, is not a lot, but it'll be more than enough, because if Eric just plays his E over here, that's 9 points. That puts Eric up 459 to 440. Jackson goes out for 6, bringing him to 446, but Eric still has a bunch of tiles on his rack. He'd have CFPRT on his rack. That's a total of 12 points. Jackson gets double that for 24. Jackson would finish with a score of 470. Eric would have 459. Jackson would win by 11 points. So, with that in mind, Eric can't effectively block Yenta. And instead of blocking Yenta, he decides to just score as many points as he can on the top right, playing F, which brings him up 29 points. He's at 469 now to Jackson's 440. However, Jackson would go out with Yenta for 20 points. He's still down 9, but he gets 8 times 2, or 16, from the remaining tiles on Eric's rack, bringing him to 476. And that's the game, guys. Jackson wins 476 to 469. Just an absolutely insane, crazy roller coaster of a game, unlike anything I've seen in a while. We went from Jackson up like nearly 200 to Eric up 50 in the span of literally 2 turns after a wild phony by Jackson, and then Jackson somehow clawed his way back through all that garbage he had on his rack and ended up winning in the endgame. So, wow. Yeah, that was just what a crazy ride. I don't know what else to say, but thanks to Jackson for posting this game and suggesting I take a look at it. Really, really entertaining stuff. I certainly enjoyed looking at it and making this video, and I hope you guys got a kick out of it as well. And yeah, if nothing else, I guess the lesson with this game is whichever side you're on, you know, always take it seriously and make sure you're bringing your A game, because, you know, as we saw here, Jackson was up nearly 200 points and came extremely close to losing this game. So even if you have a huge lead, make sure you're still, you know, playing at a high level and doing what you need to do to secure that lead. And on the flip side, if you're in Eric's position and you're down a huge number of points, you know, keep fighting. You never know what's going to happen. Regardless of who you're playing, they could either get a bad draw or make a mistake, and you could get a triple and come back into the game. So this is very emblematic, I think, of what I love about Scrabble. It's just you never know what's going to happen, and you sure never knew what was going to happen in this game until the last play. So pretty wild stuff. yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think I'll leave it at that. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and please feel free to suggest any other games like this that you think are worthy of a video. I'll gladly take a look, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.